truth is the most convincing story that maps onto reality, and that's why the central narrative is falling apart.
Right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks.
We must see the central narrative for the fiction that it is. We are Americans.
While elections are sometimes messy, this was a secure election.
The founders began the fight for human liberty and self-governance, and it's up to us to finish the job.
I'll tell you what, we are in a truth emergency right now.
This is the end game.
It's Friday, July 12th, 2024, the 1269th day of dystopia. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. A warm welcome and hello to all of you listening through a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can become a paid subscriber for as little as $50 a year or $5 a month. And in doing so, you will get the ad-free experience. You can participate in the conversation over on Substack, and you will be invited to participate in the interactive live stream every Wednesday afternoon. And if you can't or you simply don't want to, continue listening to the podcast for free on Substack or a wide variety of podcast platforms. And of course, Rumble. All I ask is that you share it with your friends. You can find the links to the podcast, the writing, the social media, and the merch site by visiting linktree.com/I'mYourModerator. Anyone who understands the roller coaster we've been on these past few years knows we haven't reached the end yet, and there may still be hard times to come. And as we add $1 trillion to the national debt every 100 days, we could be headed for some shaky financial times. If you're like me, you're figuring out how to diversify and make sure some seeds are planted for whatever may come. And that's one of the many reasons I think Bitcoin is part of our future. But it's not only about money. Bitcoin looks to be a critical part of the next generation of technology, communications, energy, verification, and even national defense. I'd encourage everyone to do their research and do it now. And if you're convinced of the likelihood that Bitcoin is an essential part of our future, then you'll need an on-ramp. I recommend River. River empowers you to grow your portfolio without any unwanted surprises and eliminates third-party custodians, putting you in control of your assets. Open an account with no minimum purchase requirement. You can get your Bitcoin journey started with just $1. Visit partner.river.com/reasonable to create your River account today. That's partner.river.com/reasonable. Now, I know that many of you out there understand the need to diversify assets, or maybe you're looking to protect your retirement savings, but you're not quite there yet on Bitcoin. And you feel better about precious metals? I get that too. I think going in multiple directions is wise, and I do that myself. And when it comes to buying precious metals, you want to be working with a good company. And that's why I've partnered with Goldco. Goldco is a 6-time Inc. 5000 winner, 2022 Company of the Year, and they've helped people like you and me place over $2 billion in gold and silver. And I have gotten silver from Goldco. And right now they're offering my supporters up to $10,000 in bonus silver while supplies last. Don't pass this offer up. Go to reasonablegold.com now. This is your opportunity to protect you and your family from an out-of-control government before it's too late. So don't wait a second longer. Take action today. Click on the link in the podcast notes or go to reasonablegold.com now and get your free gold kit, your free IRA kit. You'll be glad you did. All right, so we begin another daily episode of As the Magic 8 Ball Turns. Last night, we got to see what toast looks like on the world stage. Joe Biden has been burnt to a crisp by both sides. Fully blackened, and the smoke is rising out of the toaster. He has caught fire, and the curtains, oh, those poor curtains, are gently swaying in the breeze unaware that soon those flames will spread. We are witnessing Joe Biden get heat from every possible side while he sits there with Hunter and Jill, trying to convince all of his supporters that he was never even bred in the first place. Joe's performance was simultaneously so good and reassuring and also so bad and concerning that a solution is impossible. The people analyzing this situation are unable to figure out what the underlying reality of all of it actually is. Because, of course, they haven't been tracking the underlying reality this entire time. They've just been disseminating narratives and finding ad hoc justifications and rationalizations for everything they think and do and say. From all sides, people are arguing about whether or not Biden is incapacitated, whether or not that presents a threat to national security, whether he should be replaced, who he should be replaced with, or what should happen afterward. But every one of those discussions is already in the false reality layer, because the underlying reality is that Joe Biden never received 81 million real lawful American votes, and he's not a real legitimate president in the first place. The certification of the results in 2020 and the certification of the electors and his quote unquote inauguration were all illegitimate, improper in their legal form, and only served to further perpetuate the fraud. They did not create legitimacy out of illegitimacy. We do not need to engage the discussion on that false reality layer with anyone who's unable to understand what the underlying reality of the situation is. That Joe Biden did not receive 81 million real lawful American votes. No one anywhere in the world can substantiate the claim that he did, which is why they don't show us and no one's allowed to look. If we are not going to understand the underlying reality and then think forward from there, then we are confining ourselves to only incorrect answers. Whatever we can cobble together in the false reality with as much logic as we could possibly come up with to support it all, understanding that it will be totally incoherent ultimately. The answers to all the questions I just mentioned would not then suddenly suggest a better course of action that will better map onto reality. They will all be equally as wrong because they misunderstand what's happening at the reality prime level, which is that Joe Biden is illegitimate, and the struggle taking place is not about how to win a rigged election 3.5 months from now. The Uniparty knows elections are stolen. They're not trying to find someone who can win more votes. They're trying to find someone they can sell to the country to convince them that that person is actually preferred to Donald Trump. That's not going to be possible. But even if it was possible, it wouldn't speak the election this fall into some form of reality that provides it any more legitimacy than the last one had. If we're not there, we're not there, and we're not there. Now, to be clear, we have plenty of time for people to realize that our elections are stolen and there's no chance of legitimacy in our elections. And then maybe at that point we can work toward a solution. But the solution probably includes removing Joe Biden and everyone else from office to the extent that they occupy any office in the first place, deal with them and hold them accountable. And then we can work forward from there. But we don't need to pin all our futures on the results of a rigged election that we don't even know will happen. It's crazy. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't understand what's happening on the false reality level. It's good to understand the narrative moves, but accepting as true that which you can only derive from the false reality is always going to lead analysis into a ditch. And that's what we see now. And we see it from basically everybody. We are watching people who are unable to process what's happening now because every realization stands in direct conflict to something they have accepted as true. People who have been told not to think for themselves, people who have come to rely on information from the authoritative source are being bombarded with total nonsense. They are being totally destabilized. They are gaslighting themselves at this point into oblivion. And so let's go back through a bit of the timeline over the past few weeks, taking it as understood that Joe Biden has been in this condition for a fairly long time, years and years, and the people around him and close to him have known it. His advisors, the people in his fake administration, power players on both sides of the Uniparty, None of them have ever been in the dark about Biden's mental and physical unfitness, nor has the media. Some of them may have denied it. They may have lied about what they've known, but they knew because it's been obvious. It's always been obvious. People close to Joe Biden have known what kind of man he is. They know about his personal history. They know about his corruption in Delaware. They know his perversions. They know he was mentored by a Klansman, and they know he's always been a failure and a clown on the world stage. He had run for president multiple times before. He's been caught lying about his past, his upbringing, his educational background, his employment background, too many times to count. He has plagiarized other politicians' speeches and presented them as his own. All of that is horrendous. All of them knew, all the media members, everyone around him, everyone in the Uniparty, and they all pretended all of it was untrue. They called us conspiracy theorists for bringing it up. And as I've said before, I think we're going to see over the next few weeks a lot of those old stories coming back up. They've known the whole time. They have said the opposite of what they've known, knowing that they can get away with it because of the incentive and punishment structure within the party of false decorum. They knew what they had to say, so they said it. They might admit what they knew in private, but in public, they knew that they had to lie for the greater good. And of course, that's what they tell everybody because they can't admit that they were lying on their own behalf. And this is true to various degrees for everyone, from the people closest to Joe Biden to his most apathetic and clueless supporters. None of it was secret information. They knew who Joe Biden was. And so, as we discussed in the episode 2 weeks ago Friday, the debate presented a moment for collective catharsis. They were able to admit that which everyone knew, but no one was allowed to say. All of a sudden, they're presented the opportunity. Hey, do you want to get off now? And many people did. They said, finally, we are allowed to say the thing that we've been lying about and covering up for the last 5 years. I've reached the precipice and I have had a revelation. I cannot repeat these lies anymore. Joe Biden is clearly unfit. Everyone is seeing it. And now if I say that Joe Biden's actually doing really well in a group of people, I'll be laughed at. I'll be ridiculed. The incentive and punishment structure reversed. And every time that happens, the people who choose to opt out of the incentive and punishment structure get sifted out. And their lives are going to change because they will be exiled from the party of false decorum to whatever degree they were dependent on it. And so a sifting process begins from the other side. As I said in that episode a couple of weeks back, we have that collective moment of catharsis. People get back on the same page about what they witnessed, and then that attention can be captured and redirected, and that is what they've attempted to do. People who are still dependent on the incentive and punishment structure within the party of false decorum have spent the last couple of weeks bargaining, trying to figure out new rationalizations for why it's necessary for them to stay exactly where they are. They're just going to incorporate little pieces of the official story and attempt to keep moving forward. And they're doing that while all of the extremists who have been their kind of hardcore allies for this entire time are turning on them. And the temperature increases, the pressure increases. They're offered more incentives, they're threatened with stronger punishments, and they find themselves attempting to bargain. They are bargaining with the party of false decorum in an effort to maintain their status and their reputation. And because they have done all of their thinking within that false reality layer, most of it done around the intellectual kids table on X, formerly Twitter, on Instagram, on TikTok, on the rest of the legacy social media apps, everything they know about this situation incorporates elements of the false reality. The most important one being, of course, the idea that Joe Biden is a real, legitimate president and that we are just in a totally normal situation that is merely lightly sprinkled every now and then with absolute impossibilities and absurdities. Admitting they were wrong at a foundational level is going to destroy their reputation and their status, or at least they think it will, So they're trying to pretend that they've been right at the foundational level this entire time, and then trying to match that with elements of the false reality that still present a consistent point of view. Now, obviously, they're going to be doomed in those attempts because we're continuing down the same path, and this exact thing is going to keep happening, and it's going to be progressively intensifying. These major jarring and cathartic moments where the sifting occurs again. Joe Biden, the fake president, who has made the United States of America look like a fool nation for years, is now being made to look like a fool himself by the people who have supported him all this time. Is it because they understand what he's actually done and what he represents? Do they understand his illegitimacy? Do they understand that he's been this incapacitated for the entire time and that our country has been under threat the entire time? No, they understand that the incentive and punishment structure has changed for them. And now their expressed viewpoints need to change along with it so they can preserve their status and reputation. This should not be surprising. All of these people happen to be the exact same people who thought it would tarnish their reputation to openly support Donald Trump. This isn't just a matter of the so-called Democrats or leftists or however else they want to refer to those people who actually went out and voted for Joe Biden. It's about everyone in the Uniparty, all of the Joe Biden supporters, including all those quote unquote Republicans who pretended he's been legitimate this whole time. People who supported publicly and openly Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley and whoever else. They want this to be done on their terms. And so they're attempting every possible position they could attempt besides the only position that might lead the way out, which is to simply admit that they were wrong about the entire thing. But that's not what we're seeing. People are afraid to admit that they made mistakes and they believed the wrong people and they came to the wrong conclusions because they think that will destroy their status and their reputation. And of course, that's a total inversion within the false reality. That is the absolute first step you must take in order to rebuild your reputation. I haven't talked about it in a while, but a few years ago, I was developing a concept, and I will use it in the future again, but the joy of having been wrong. Not the joy of being wrong. Being wrong sucks. But having been wrong, admitting that you were wrong, and now you're on a path toward trying to figure out what's right, or at least leaving one more wrong thing behind, that, in my mind, is a totally joyous process of exploring the world again anew. I love going back and reading through history and having that shocked moment where I learned something new I was wrong about, something I was misled about, or intentionally misinformed about. Because as soon as that piece of the false reality drops away, I no longer have to try to figure out how that thing fits into reality as I understand it. It is a figment of this layer of fiction that has been thrust upon us throughout our entire lives. And it's usually those big things in the false reality that they're most concerned with lying about, that they make the most effort to hammer into our heads so that we always understand there's only one position to express about this. And because we've done it so many times, not knowing why, just understanding that we had to. And we don't want to think of ourselves as stupid. We don't want to think of ourselves as dishonest. We know that other people have heard us say that thing. We can't just go around admitting that we were wrong about that. People will think we're stupid. But every time we think that, we have to remember there are a whole lot of people out there who don't believe all those things. And those people are hearing us too. And they can see that not only are we a little stupid, but we are also pretty dishonest. And that's even worse. But we allow it because we assume that everyone else is operating on the same incentive and punishment structure we are when we're trapped in the party of false decorum. We don't think that the opinion of anyone outside the party even matters. The incentive and punishment structure only exists inside the party of false decorum, and the entire mission is to make sure that you're not like those people outside the party. When you admit that you're wrong about some of the core tenets within the party of false decorum, you present yourself as the undesirable people, the people outside of the incentive and punishment structure within the party of false decorum. The point of life is to impress the people inside the party so that they will pull you up to their level. If you want your life to improve, then you need to impress people on ever escalating levels. And if you stop doing that, you stop ascending. If you speak out against it, then you're exiled. New information enters into the central narrative bubble. It must be adapted to because it is now undeniable. And all of the adaptations are still required to allow for the truth of the false reality. So good luck, commie. Let's see how big your brain is. Let's see the complexity of the lie you are able to tell in order to keep pretending. Now, that's the normal process. What they're currently enduring is all of their trusted voices and authoritative sources. They're all arguing with each other, presenting entirely different versions of reality. It's like they're watching their parents fighting, knowing that both of their parents are lying about everything they're saying. And then attempting to figure out how not only are they both right, but neither of them are lying. They are being gaslit into oblivion. Standard issue villagers' brains are breaking. And I expect that we will probably just hover in this dynamic for a few weeks at least, maybe all the way through the fall. The pressure will intensify on Biden. I don't see any way they're getting rid of him. And what will it look like when they have made their only product completely worthless and have nothing else to offer? There are a lot of theories out there about potential attempts on Biden's life. The idea that they might be able to pin that on MAGA extremists. No one is going to believe that. Whatever competition is going on behind the scenes, it is now becoming public. And we're getting to see the factions going at one another. We have a circular firing squad developing, and it looks like they might actually destroy themselves. I'm sure they would love to delegitimize Joe Biden without talking about the fact that he never received 81 million real lawful American votes. But can they even avoid that at this point? I kind of don't think so. The whole thing is collapsing in on itself. Now, before we get to the fake president and his performance on the world stage, let's briefly discuss the actual duly elected president of the United States of America, Donald J. Trump. Viktor Orban, the leader of Hungary, posted on X, formerly Twitter, last evening, Peace Mission 5.0. It was an honor to visit President Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago today. We discussed ways to make peace. The good news of the day, he's going to solve it. Now, we know he went and visited Volodymyr Zelensky, the comedic actor in Ukraine. We know he went and visited Vladimir Putin in Russia. We know he went and visited Xi Jinping in China. And then yesterday, he left the NATO summit and headed on down to Mar-a-Lago. And what a contrast we have. Donald Trump and Viktor Orban talking about world peace, people who actually have the respect and trust of global leaders who matter. And then you have Joe Biden speaking before NATO and bragging about Ukraine's successes in its quote unquote war against Russia. In AFP's coverage of the Trump and Orban meeting, they quoted Finnish President Alexander Stubb saying, "I'll say it out loud. I don't think there's any point in having conversations with authoritarian regimes that are violating the law. He can do it on his own behalf," meaning Orban. "But I fundamentally disagree about doing that. I simply do not see the purpose." So they're upset that Orban is visiting these so-called authoritarian regimes, Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping. The hopes were that after he visited the comedic actor in Kyiv, that he was going to be all of a sudden on Ukraine's side. The comedic actor would have convinced him that Ukraine's cause was just and righteous, despite the fact that Crimea and all of those regions of eastern Ukraine are part of Russia. Also, if people can violate international law and there's nothing anyone can do to enforce the international law, then international laws are just merely suggestions. They're reduced to our norms. They also quoted the fake administration's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, saying, "The U.S. position, the Biden administration position, is nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine." Whatever adventurism that is being undertaken without Ukraine's consent or support, is not something that's consistent with our policy, the foreign policy of the United States. He said he can't speculate as to what Orban is up to exactly. So Trump is an authoritarian, set to lead an authoritarian regime. So are Putin, of course, and Xi. Orban is flagrantly violating the rules of the European Union. These authoritarian regimes, according to the Finnish president, are violating international law. Jake Sullivan is asserting that the Biden administration's policy must be followed by other world leaders. And he's concerned that President Trump's discussions may not be consistent with the illegitimate administration's foreign policy. Well, okay, but apparently no one cares. No one cares about violating the authority, the rules, the laws of the one world liberal international rules-based order. What does it mean when the forces and the powers that this world order was set up to guard against no longer respect the world order's ability to enforce compliance with its demands? These bodies, take the UN for instance, the UN was always a construct in some sense. It is a projection of abstract power. And at various points, that abstract power might be backed up with actual power, with kinetic power, in shows of force in various places around the world, whether that's militarily or through economic systems. But there were enforcement mechanisms. There was real power behind the abstract power. It is abundantly clear that the enforcement mechanisms have broken down. There doesn't seem to be a military enforcement mechanism capable of substantiating the abstract power projection, and they don't have the economic enforcement mechanism either. As we can see again and again and again, sanctions don't mean anything as major world powers begin to move away from the central bank's fiat currency currently branded as the American dollar. When you don't have the enforcement mechanisms to support and back up the projection of abstract power, then it becomes apparent that the only power is the abstraction. And as soon as anyone challenges the power of that abstraction with real power, the abstraction immediately falls away. This is why it's important to understand just how much of what we observe is actually just the abstraction and not the thing itself. There's a reason that Joe Biden and Donald Trump are treated differently on the world stage. The allies of the American Uniparty that Joe Biden is currently the face of on the world stage are the countries supposedly leading that one world international liberal rules-based order. It's essentially the British Commonwealth nations, some countries in Europe, and then a few other countries scattered about the world who they've been able to subdue. And it's not just Joe Biden who looks foolish on the world stage. All of the leaders who've been going along with that program look as foolish as Joe Biden does. Emmanuel Macron looks like a fool. Justin Trudeau looks like a fool. Keir Starmer just got there. He looks like a fool. Rishi Sunak looked like a fool before him, and the entire British royal family look like fools at this point. And as a quick aside, I thought of this morning. I was thinking about how the concept of the Queen's English was a funny inversion all on its own. It's just a bunch of adult-sized grovelers with child-sized brains in their heads applauding themselves for sounding like a queen. Think about how ridiculous it is that people aspire to sounding that way. Now, we've talked all week about the magic 8 ball. Every day we see a new wave of supposed Biden allies calling on Joe Biden to step down, to resign if necessary, but to get out of this fake presidential campaign so that someone else can attempt to be reported as the winner of a rigged and stolen election, to the point where enough people would agree that that was possible that they won't be embarrassed to say it in public while being able to mete out enough social punishment that everyone complies. And in response, Joe Biden goes out there and shows them how strong and confident and competent he is. They plead with Joe Biden to get out. They challenge him to get out. They demand he gets out. And old scrappy Scranton Joe, well, he says, come on, man. I mean, the idea. That's malarkey. Anyway, the 8-ball says don't count on it, and we know we're going to have another shake of the 8-ball tomorrow. But Joe Biden, he's a proud man. He's already burning up in the toaster, and he's saying, if you keep me in the toaster, I'm going to burn the house down, and I'm going to take all of you with me. And we will get into some of the reactions in a second, but let's take a look at Toast on the world stage. Now, initially, everything was focused on this big boy press conference, as they were calling it, for some unknown reason. I guess they just wanted everyone to say big boy over and over and over again. Well, congratulations. I guess you got me to do it, commies. Woo-hoo, you win. But we didn't even get to the big boy press conference before old Joe started to have problems. And we didn't get to Joe's problems before there were already reports that after his press conference, there would be more calls for him to drop out. It's like they had already scripted his performance and the reaction to that performance. And we'll get to that in a second. But before the big boy press conference started, Joe Biden had more events at the NATO summit to host. Here is how he introduced the comedic actor from Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky.
Now I want to hand it over to the president of Ukraine, who has as much courage as he has determination. Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin. President Putin. He's going to beat President Putin. President Zelensky. I'm so focused on beating Putin, we got to worry about it. Anyway, Mr. President.
I'm better.
You are a hell of a lot better.
So fine. He called the comedic actor from Ukraine President Putin rather than President Zelensky. Of course, he's not President Zelensky. His term ended a while ago, and his country may have never existed, but his character's name is President Zelensky. And so that's what everyone goes with in order to be taken seriously by people who are addicted to the central narrative as they watch it on television. Now, we learned yesterday that all of this is carefully choreographed and scripted, but every now and then something goes off track. Joe Biden has been a gaffe machine for his entire career. And you know what they say about gaffes? The old adage is it's when you accidentally say something true. And he did that yesterday. Vladimir Putin is the president of all of the areas they've been fighting over. The people of those areas have voted in a series of referenda to become part of Russia and to re-elect Vladimir Putin as their leader. But I know that hasn't been incorporated into the central narrative yet. Therefore, I'm a conspiracy theorist for saying it. Now, the central narrative has incorporated the stories about those referenda, and we can just look at what international law says about when the people vote on who to represent them. And none of that is a conspiracy theory. It's just a conspiracy theory to put that all together and reach the most obvious possible conclusion. What does it mean when a group of people whose power exists only as an abstraction attempt to convince a group of people with real power that they should bow before the abstraction? The only way anyone would do that is in correspondence to the incentive and punishment structure. And if you have already removed yourself from the incentive and punishment structure and opted out, then the abstract power projection has no effect whatsoever. But hey, it's like Trump, according to all the people who don't even try to understand Trump. He's always speaking in euphemisms, you see. He's never actually meaning what he's saying. You're supposed to take him seriously, but not literally, or so they say. And in order to make Trump sound stupid, they take him literally and not seriously. Itself a total inversion. They are very smart, you see. Biden, however, does not speak in euphemisms. He's not clever enough for euphemisms, so he speaks in gaffes, and he just happens to make them constantly. Now, if you're getting together with all your fellow quote-unquote world leaders, and you're making all of these major public presentations, you are trying to project your abstract power. You're trying to say to the world, all of these important countries are getting together so that they can agree about what's going to happen. We are going to disseminate the message about what's going to happen, and then all of you will comply and obey. That's how this whole thing works. And in order to convince people to comply and obey, they have to project that power, that seriousness, that legitimacy. If they fail to do that, if they actually project weakness and incompetence, then their abstract power projection fails and it breaks down. So they have to renew it. They have to convince everyone even harder this time. Look how serious we are. Look how competent we are. Look at all the threats we can make. Look at how we can describe what has happened as though it was the best possible thing to have happened, despite the fact that we also told you the entire time that things weren't working and couldn't work unless you gave us more power, more money, more control. They wanted the whole production to go off without a hitch. They want to show the world, look how serious we are. Look how powerful we are. The only problem was the meeting was in the United States, which means it's going to be hosted by the fake president, Joe Biden, a man who has thoroughly embarrassed himself to the point where no one in the world actually believes that he could beat Donald Trump. It's probably led many people to the understanding that he didn't beat Donald Trump last time. And then just 2 weeks after watching this demented old pervert wander off and try to find himself a parachute man, they have to pretend that he is leading an alliance of the world's most powerful and consequential nations. And old Joe, he almost had it. He almost stuck the landing, and he went and called the comedic actor Volodymyr Zelensky President Putin. And the reputations of everyone around him, including all of these foreign leaders, become infected with his fecklessness and incompetence. They are all being made to look unserious as a consequence of this Ukraine effort and the fact that Joe Biden is pretending to be the president of the United States. They are all going along with it. They are getting exposed just the same way the people around Joe Biden, the members of the Uniparty, the media, all of Biden's supporters, including the ones on the Uniparty right who attested to his illegitimacy. The support of Joe Biden as he falls apart on the world stage, it's infecting them all. And calling the comedic actor President Putin would have been bad enough as a lead in to his big press conference designed to convince everyone that he really was up to the task. And then the press conference began nearly 2 hours late. Now, as we get into this, it's crucial to remember what we learned from CNN yesterday. They ran an article on their front page with the headline, "Angry and Stunned Democrats Blame Biden's Closest Advisors for Shielding Public from Full Extent of President's Decline." In that article, they wrote this: "There have been clear signs throughout his term of Biden being increasingly stage managed, with lists of talking points, names of questioners, and drawings of where he should walk presented to him by aides. Ahead of closed-door cabinet meetings that Biden attends, it is customary for cabinet officials to submit questions and key talking points that they plan to present in front of Biden ahead of time to White House aides. Two sources with direct knowledge told CNN. The entire display is kind of an act. One of those sources told CNN. They would come and say, 'Hey, the president is going to call on you about 25 minutes in and ask this question. What are the bullet points you'll respond with?' The second source, who echoed the same description, said when Biden attends cabinet meetings, they are not freewheeling. They are pretty well orchestrated. So they're saying it's kind of an act, but they're not saying it's all an act. They're not saying that everyone is participating in the same charade. Biden and his people set up their side of it. That stuff's all pretty well scripted and managed. He has little cue cards telling him where to stand, what to say, how to act. And then, sure, they go to the reporter's side and they make sure the reporters are going to ask the right questions and hit the same follow-ups. And then naturally, they'll let Biden know what the reporters are going to ask and give him the proper answer and tell him to read the answer. But it's not totally scripted. And it's weird, isn't it? We don't want to think of it as a television production, but how can we think of it any other way? We could already be watching the Jeffrey Katzenberg 5 weeks of riveting content and not even know it, because we are so inclined to treat all of this as unassailably real. There might be some propagandistic aspects. They might overmanage a few aspects of the reality to present a convincing case to the viewing public. But beyond that, it's just real action. Well, okay, But you're going to have to tell me which part of it is real. Are Biden's gaffes real? They might be. They might be real accidents that were not scripted into the story. Is it real when he ventures off course and goes on a tangent and tells us some story about how cannibals ate his uncle or says his butt's been wiped? I mean, maybe he's not up to the task of performing his part. But what parts of that press conference were discernibly real beyond those two? And those are suspect. The reporters' questions were clearly prepared. Each reporter asked a different version of the same question. They just thought of different ways to present the idea that Joe Biden was too old, too weak, too feckless, too incapacitated to continue being president. It was like they were playing green eggs and ham with him every time they would give the magic 8-ball a shake. Fake President Biden, how can you be president for 4 more years if you're unable to get to your entire schedule because you keep falling asleep in the afternoon? Fake President Biden, are you confident that Kamala Harris can be president? Fake President Biden, if the polls say that Kamala Harris has a better chance of beating Donald Trump, would you then drop out? We were watching them negotiate with Biden on the world stage, attempting to manipulate the public reputation of the case for and against Joe Biden dropping out. Every question was the sort of question that 10 years ago we would be told failed to respect the dignity of the office of president. You were not allowed, if you recall, to ever even contemplate insulting or disagreeing with Barack Obama while he was on the world stage. You would be called a traitor, in fact, for attempting to diminish the American president in front of all these important people. But then Donald Trump came along. And if you weren't prepared to diminish Donald Trump's reputation on the world stage in front of important people, well, now that's what it is to be a traitor. You could be accused of threatening democracy by not saying enough mean things about Donald Trump. Yesterday, the reporters were being overtly disrespectful to Joe Biden, the so-called president of the United States of America. Now, they won't be punished for that. They won't be castigated for that because diminishing Joe Biden on the world stage was the purpose of the event from their side of things. And so what does it mean when we know the questions are scripted and approved of in advance? Did they want the media to look harsh so that Joe Biden might get additional sympathy? Well, it's hard to say, but we knew there were going to be two narratives coming out of that event, no matter how Biden performed, no matter what questions were asked. One side would be supporting Biden, saying that he was the one and only choice, the necessary choice, the only man for the job, while the other side knew that no matter how well Joe Biden performed, he was already dead in the water, he had to be removed, and whatever happened in the big boy press conference would only make that more obvious. Everyone was going to see whatever it was they wanted to see because they were already locked into their positions, totally detached from the events in Reality Prime. The press conference itself actually didn't matter at all. The events in Reality Prime, to the extent that any of it was real, took a back seat to whatever the narrative demanded from whatever viewpoint it was being expressed. It was like a Rorschach test for political loyalties. And so let's get to a few moments from the press conference. There's not much point in taking any of it seriously and analyzing it as though he was expressing his own position about something that would actually happen in the world. He was simply trying to provide a strong presentation and give a performance that would convince the world that the debate was a one-time thing and he's actually very much in control of himself mentally and physically. Now, this is the moment that has probably gotten the most attention.
What concerns do you have about Vice President Harris's ability to beat Donald Trump if she were at the top of the ticket?
Look, I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president, but I think she was not qualified to be president. So let's start there. Number one.
So number one is that he wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president if she wasn't up for the job. And this moment was turned into some incredible memes. Pictures of Kamala Harris shaking hands with the comedic actor Volodymyr Zelensky, with captions reading President Putin and Vice President Trump. Memes with Kamala Harris's face superimposed onto Donald Trump's head. Really disturbing stuff. But think about that question again. He just asked the so-called sitting president about the chances of the vice president being able to win if she was actually the one on the ticket. That question basically amounted to, tell us why Kamala Harris cannot possibly beat Donald Trump. If Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were actually president and vice president, that question would be disrespectful to both of them. Yesterday, we heard how Joe Biden talked about Jens Stoltenberg's wife. Here's Joe Biden discussing all of his closest advisors, the people who are being blamed for hiding Joe Biden's incapacitation, and his own wife, Dr. Jill Biden. Here he is trying to land a big shot on Donald Trump, making a very, very clever and spontaneous joke about Trump's golf game.
I've done, where's Trump been? Riding around in his golf cart, filling out his scorecard before he hits the ball? I mean, look, he's done virtually nothing. And I don't know how many, don't hold me to it, roughly 20 major events. Some with thousands of people showing up. And so I just think it's better. I always have an inclination, whether I was playing sports or doing politics, just to keep going, not stop. I just got to just pace myself a little more. Pace myself. And the next debate, I'm not going to be traveling in the 15 time zones a week before. Anyway, that's what it was about. That's what it was about. And by the way, even with that, I love my staff, but they add things all the time. At the very end, I'm catching hell from my wife for that. Anyway.
Now, Donald Trump just challenged Joe Biden the other night to a round of golf, 18 holes. He was going to spot him 20 strokes total. And Joe Biden still hasn't accepted the invitation, but he does want to make golf jokes. What kind of person could imagine that Joe Biden is doing more than Donald Trump and Donald Trump is just always on vacation? Virtually no one believes Joe Biden's doing anything anymore. Most people by this point can see and admit that Joe Biden doesn't seem to be exercising any real control over anything. He just said he's had like 20 major events, some of them with thousands of people. I'm not sure I've seen any Joe Biden event that draws thousands of people. Trump's had those anytime he's wanted to have them for 9 straight years. Joe tried to blame his debate performance on his extensive travel leading up to it, despite having been home for plenty long enough. He just tried to shift blame onto his own staff, saying that they occasionally add things, they write things in at the end. It throws Joe Biden off. He's basically Will Ferrell, an anchor man. He'll read whatever they put in the monitor, and apparently they must be adding things at the end, throwing him off. And then he says he's catching hell from his wife over that. What in the world is he talking about? Is Jill mad at him because his staffers are adding things into the speeches, into the teleprompters, throwing him off course? Is she mad at Joe because Joe's not keeping up with it? Or are they trying to play good cop, bad cop with Joe Biden's staffers the way the media is trying to play good cop, bad cop with Joe Biden? Can we shift the blame to this person or this group of people? Will anyone believe it when we do? And can we get rid of him? Can we get rid of them? Here we see Joe Biden flexing his foreign policy expertise. This is Joe Biden's reputation. He's a very serious man on the world stage.
I like hell about what's going on. And so the idea that we're going to be able to fundamentally change Russia in the near term is not likely. But one thing for certain, if we allow Russia to succeed in Ukraine, they're not stopping in Ukraine. I recommend, I know you know this because you've written about it, read Putin's speech after they moved in, what it was all about in Kyiv. It wasn't about just, anyway, read what his objective is. And anyway, but so I think that I'm prepared to talk to any leader who wants to talk, including if Putin called me and wanted to talk. Last time I talked to Putin was trying to get him to work on an arms control agreement related to nuclear weapons in space. That didn't go very far. So my point is, I'm prepared to talk to anybody, but I don't see any inclination. There is an inclination on the part of the Chinese to keep in contact with me because they're not sure where this all goes.
So Biden had just claimed that Russia had lost 350,000 2,000 soldiers in their battle with Ukraine, and they just lie like hell about what's actually going on over there. As we've talked about before, Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin haven't spoken in years. Biden actually brought that up. He said, the last time I talked to Putin, it was about nuclear weapons in space. It's basically just Mad Libs at this point. I can do it too. Last time I hung out with Frank Sinatra, it was about dinosaur farms in Atlantis. See, you can just say anything. But there was something newsworthy in that clip. He said he would be willing to talk to Putin. It just doesn't seem like there's any inclination to right now. And I guess that's a little odd because Donald Trump is saying he could have peace in one day, and Viktor Orban, who seems to be the world's ambassador in this situation, is flying down to Mar-a-Lago to meet with Donald Trump and then reporting that Donald Trump is going to bring peace. But I guess it's good to know that Biden's willing to talk. Except the strange thing is, just 1 minute prior, he said this.
I'm not sure you answered on whether you would be ready to go deal with Putin and Xi 2 or 3 years from now.
I'm ready to deal with them now and 3 years from now. Look, like I said, I'm dealing with Xi right now and direct contact with him. I have no good reason to talk to Putin right now. There's not much that he is prepared to do in terms of accommodating any change in his behavior. But there isn't any world leader I'm not prepared to deal with. But I understand the generic point is Putin ready to talk? I'm not ready to talk to Putin unless Putin's ready to change his behavior. And the idea, look, Putin's got a problem. First of all, in this war that he is supposedly have won.
So he's ready to talk to Putin, but not unless Putin changes his behavior. And I think I've mentioned before how weird I think that word behavior is when it's coming from members of the party of false decorum, when it's coming from the child brains. They pretend that these other world leaders are immature and acting out. This is how they tried to paint Donald Trump for all that time. He needs to change his behavior before I'll talk with him. Except Joe Biden's not the adult in the room. The people around him are not the adults in the room. The people at the NATO summit are not the adults in the room. They're not even being taken seriously by the people they can't stop insulting and threatening. And there's no reason to take them seriously because all their power is an abstraction and they have no enforcement mechanism in reality prime to back that up. Here, Joe Biden addresses the polling data that we are supposed to believe is real and a product of actual science. It has numbers, and numbers are always what we must refer to in any scenario. And the polls are good or bad, depending on perspective, or they're good and bad at the same time, just like everything else these days.
I don't recall most of the Democratic presidents winning my state when I was a candidate. The truth of the matter is I understand the self-interest of a candidate. If they think that, running with Biden at the top is going to hurt them, then they're going to run away. I get it. But so far, go and look at the polling data in their states. Look at the in-depth, and by the way, I think you'd all acknowledge, and you're all experts. I'm not being solicitous about the president. You're experts on this stuff. How accurate does anybody think the polls are these days? I can give you a series of polls where you have likely voters, me versus Trump, where I win all the time. When the unlikely voters vote, he wins sometimes. The bottom line is all the polling data right now, which I think is premature because the campaign really hasn't even started. I mean, it hadn't started in earnest yet. Most of the time, it doesn't start till after September, after Labor Day. So a lot can happen. But I think I'm the best I believe I'm the best qualified to govern. And I think I'm the best qualified to win.
It seems like Joe Biden can't decide whether or not the polls are real and worth paying attention to and worth using to substantiate your argument, or whether they're fake and worthless. He's trying to assert that when likely voters only are polled, Joe Biden wins every time, and Donald Trump only wins when they're using unlikely voters. and he was answering a question about whether or not he was going to be a drag on candidates down ballot. One more moment from the big boy press conference, and then we will get into the response.
This concludes.
Respectfully, earlier you misspoke in your opening answer. You referred to Vice President Harris as Vice President Trump. Right now, Donald Trump is using that to mock your age and your memory. How do you combat that criticism from tonight?
Listen to him.
This concludes tonight's press conference. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, everyone.
So they're about to wrap up. A reporter gets a question in just before the bell. Donald Trump is making fun of you on social media because you said Vice President Trump, and he's using it to mock your age and your memory. How do you respond? He says, listen to him. And that, my friends, is quite a gaffe. That's the sort of gaffe that you would see in campaign ads, and the sort of thing that we would be told changed the entire tenor of the campaign. Oh, it's a devastating ad Donald Trump's team has produced. This changes everything. But let's get the reviews on Joe Biden's performance. He was tasked with being a big boy on the world stage. Let's find out how he did, at least according to the people who are disseminating the range of opinions within the central narrative that will hopefully appeal to enough of the standard issue villagers that one of them actually catches on and explains how this cascade of absurdities is actually all real and totally makes sense. My friend Patriots in Control posted screenshots of two CNN headlines, the first on May 30th of this year saying, fact check, Trump delivers flurry of false and misleading claims as trial nears conclusion. And this is CNN's Daniel Dale, that little twerp on television who tells you how the official story is always correct in creative new ways. And we've been exposed to 9 years of that when it comes to Donald Trump. We are told he lies 30,000 times. He's lied a million, billion, zillion times. All he does is lie. All Trump does is lie. The official story is always true, and Trump's always disagreeing with it, and that makes him a liar. And the entire time, they were defending Joe Biden. They've always defended the regime, the Uniparty, and all of its television characters from any disputes they might face coming from people like Donald Trump and whoever else might disagree with the official story. Well, Joe Biden is no longer under the media's protection, apparently. Daniel Dale, last night, fact check Biden's false and misleading claims at high-stakes news conference. And we're not going to go through that because fact checks are nonsense and the official story is nonsense. There is no point in quibbling over the details of complete and total fictions. If and when the substance of these fact checks actually reflect a truth from reality prime, they will just supplement that by distorting the meaning. It's an exercise in futility. Now, we've talked many times about how MSNBC's lead anchorman, Rachel Maddow, is always the one who disseminates all of the brand new slogans. Here is Rachel letting us know how everyone is supposed to respond to what they saw.
Chris, and I won't go on at length. I will just say, though, you noted that there were some moments of, startlingly impressive command of the issues. This is just my opinion. He is not only strong on foreign policy, he is just fundamentally right on foreign policy in the way that he talks about it. And again, your mileage may vary. That is how I feel about the way he talks about our relationship with our allies and our relationship with NATO. You can hear his command of the issues, particularly in his asides, like mentioning as an offhand way that it was Turkey really that needed really to be talked into an expansion of NATO that included Finland and Sweden, talking about the numbers of Russian troop losses in Ukraine, talking about the fact that he turned in his notes after he spoke privately with President Xi, alluding to the fact that Trump had all those weird meetings with the Russians and Putin in which he had no note taker present. I mean, it's even in the little asides where it just shows you he is a master of the foreign policy field and has been for decades in his career in the Senate, the vice president, and the presidency.
So there's narrative one. Joe Biden giving a masterclass on foreign policy. He understands what the news has said for the last 2 years, and he is able to repeat it on the world stage. Now, is any of that true in reality prime? No, we can see that the world is not operating that way at all. The multipolar world order is emerging in unstoppable fashion, adding additional countries as members of these international and global governing bodies is irrelevant in any practical sense. They are just attempting to increase their projection of abstract power. And of course, they're failing to do that because Joe Biden is incapable of projecting any sort of power. And the real power isn't there, as we've seen time and time and time again. And the underlying truth, of course, is that he's illegitimate. So he doesn't even have the proper amount of real power that his office would normally suggest. Here's Rachel discussing Joe Biden's view on the polls.
The reality about polling numbers for incumbent presidents and the real history of that versus what President Biden said, which was not actually factually accurate as far as I can tell. That's worrying because it makes me worry that the president is being given information about his political standing that may not be based in reality, that may be sunnier than is real.
The people around Joe Biden are giving him information that is not based in reality, and that even includes the data? I thought the data had to be based in reality. Isn't that why we give the numbers so much credit all the time? And Rachel Maddow is suggesting that Joe Biden, once again, is not getting good information from the people around him. Joe's wrong a lot, but it's not his fault. He's being given bad information. What's he supposed to do? Understand that the information he's being given doesn't actually make any sense? He's too busy worrying about important decisions to figure out whether or not the things he's being told are true. Here's a clip from MSNBC's All In with Chris Hayes, with Jen Psaki, the fake president's former fake press secretary, and some guy I've never seen.
If you're standing up, if you're a Democrat right now and you're standing up and you're saying that Joe Biden is not fit to run for office and therefore should not be in office in January, you're saying he's also not fit to be president right now. What the hell are you doing?
He goes on to reiterate that it makes no sense that if Joe Biden is not strong and capable enough to be president in the future, based on what we can see right now, then he's also not strong and capable of being president right now. And of course, Psaki jumped in to defend Joe Biden. You got to play both sides of it, you see. Otherwise, it just looks like they're ganging up on Joe Biden, and then they will seem mean because everyone knows they still have to defend Joe Biden. Even if they're able to take him out, they don't want to go through the entire process of replacing him now. They need to be able to present it as a proactive decision on Joe Biden's part. He's going to finish out the term and then he will step down. And in the meantime, we need somebody else to run, whoever's going to carry that baton after Joe Biden. It's a very delicate balance they're attempting here. We discussed Jim Clyburn a couple weeks back. Clyburn's got a whole lot of power. He's in charge of the election fraud machine around the country, all the black church ladies who process the fraudulent vote. Here's his newest position.
Is this the same Joe Biden that we saw 2 years ago?
Well, look, I grew up...
Is it the same Joe Biden? No.
Is this the same Joe Biden we saw 2 years ago? No. Thank goodness that's just a euphemism. Otherwise, we might think that Jim Clyburn is suggesting that there are different versions of Joe Biden, and we know that can't be true. He was on vacation. He was spending some time at the beach. He got a tan. He's the new orange man now. But also, in the middle of that, he was pale at the debate. And that's only because he had a cold and was very tired. His skin changed color for that reason. Now, the guy who attempted to make big news yesterday, declaring that he was no longer on Team Biden, Democrat Representative Jim Hines. Here is Jim Hines from back in January, just so that we can kind of set the table.
Republican understands, and we all understand this because we're in politics. You know, your average American sitting at the table right now with a cup of coffee may not really worry too much about exactly where the Russian line is in Ukraine. But when it comes down to a debate we have whether we're going to send troops to defend Taiwan or to stop a Hezbollah invasion in Israel or to stop some crazy activity by North Korea, history shows that when we stand down from our role in the world, bad things happen that eventually result in Americans dying.
Jim Hines absolutely loves the regime. He is on board for every piece of the agenda. And the reason for that is because he is a ranking member of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence and a member of the House Financial Services Committee. He is tied all the way in. And this comes in the wake of last week, Mark Warner from the Senate Intelligence Committee trying to apply pressure and getting Biden to resign. It's interesting, isn't it, that these members of the intelligence committees want Joe Biden to resign? I wonder what that says about the priorities of the intelligence community. What would it mean that the intelligence community is trying to apply pressure to convince the sitting so-called president to step down? Is the intelligence community supposed to do that sort of thing? And now we're in a strange situation because Joe Biden's not legitimate and neither are any of the people in the House or Senate for that matter. But under normal terms, this would sound like the intelligence community is trying to subvert the duly elected president. Sometimes that is known as a coup. Sometimes that's even known as treason. But right now it's okay because the people on TV, the only people capable of actually making a strong accusation of a coup or of treason, well, they're also on the side of the people running the coup and carrying out the treason. So it's just fine to broadcast it on their airwaves. But let's snap back to the present. Here's what Jim Himes had to say yesterday.
When there's an excess of love and loyalty, you get 70 million Americans who will not budge from their support for a felon, from a criminal, from an adjudicated rapist who has promised to turn this country into an authoritarian country. That's what happens when you won't set aside loyalty and love and emotion. So the stakes are so high that right now the question is, not how loyal are you, but can we avert, forget about, and we can talk more if you like about, the event that Joe Biden were reelected, but can you avert a second Trump presidency? And there is not a single number out there, not one, Cook report telling us that we may lose the House, that says that Joe Biden is going to win. And so the answer to that, which is a fair answer, is that, but there's still time. There's 4 or 5 months to the election. So then you need to ask yourself, what's the trajectory look like here? Are things getting better? If you believe that the problem the Democrats have is that we haven't gotten our message across, the message of the bipartisan infrastructure law, the message of capping out-of-pocket expenses in Medicare at $2,000, at capping insulin costs at $35, and standing up for veterans, and if you believe that our problem is that we haven't gotten that message across well, and if you also believe that the president has the biggest megaphone, you have to drop the emotion and the loyalty and love and say, in the next 4 or 5 months, is that story going to be told with such precision and poetry and beauty that you will turn around all the numbers that say we are going to lose? And I did this painful thing tonight because for me, the answer to that is I just don't see that trajectory. I don't see the numbers.
Now, that is quite a dramatic presentation all about love and loyalty. Look at these people who just won't leave Trump's side, even though he's an adjudicated rapist. Well, wait a second. What is that? If he's guilty of rape, if he raped somebody, why aren't you just calling him a rapist? Why is it always adjudicated rapist? Oh, it's because they're trying to reference the E. Jean Carroll trial that didn't actually prove Donald Trump raped anybody. There's not even a solid accusation of how or when he did. E. Jean Carroll just made up something. Then they made up a trial. They switched laws to be able to bring that lawsuit in the first place. And in a civil trial, the jury of people who weren't Donald Trump's peers determined that there might be a better than 50% chance that E. Jean Carroll was telling some version of the truth, and therefore Donald Trump is eligible to be called a racist by these Looney Tunes on television. Now, why is Jim Himes so fired up, and why right now? Because you have to eliminate any idea that Jim Himes didn't know about Joe Biden's condition prior to a few weeks ago. The guy on the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence had no idea that the fake president is incapacitated. We're going to have to believe that to explain his passionate delivery. Otherwise, there would have to be some other explanation for that. And the only explanation that would be implied by that performance is that Jim Himes is having an absolute meltdown. He is panic-stricken and lashing out. He was meant to be the big defection of last night. Everyone was going to see how serious this thing is getting once Jim Himes comes out. He's worried that the problem is people love Joe Biden too much, and they can't let him go because of that love. But right now, despite how much they love him, everyone's just going to have to agree to let Joe Biden go. The intelligence committees have been given their orders. So what do we have? Joe Biden gave a foreign policy masterclass while also being totally misinformed by his staff about where this whole race stands. He's not fit to be in office in the future based on how he is now. But if he's this way now, then he's not fit to be in office now. So what do we do between now and the future? Is Joe Biden even the same guy we saw 2 years ago? The answer, according to Jim Clyburn, is no. And now the intel community, through Jim Himes, is making it known that Joe has got to go. Well, what about dollar store Barack Obama? Master of alliterations, Hakeem Jeffries, who is supposedly the House Minority Leader, but not according to this letter that he sent to his Democrat colleagues today. The letterhead indicates nothing about the U.S. House of Representatives, and it just says Hakeem Jeffries, Democratic Leader. Now, maybe it's always been that way and I just never noticed, but that strikes me as weird. He writes, "Dear colleague, over the past several days, House Democrats have engaged in a thoughtful and extensive discussion about the future of our country during a time when freedom, democracy, and the economic well-being of everyday Americans are on the line. Our discourse has been candid, clear-eyed, and comprehensive," just like he said yesterday. "On behalf of the House Democrat Caucus, I requested and was graciously granted a private meeting with President Joe Biden. That meeting occurred yesterday evening. In my conversation with President Biden, I directly expressed the full breadth of insight, heartfelt perspectives, and conclusions about the path forward that the caucus has shared in our recent time together. As House Democrats have done throughout this Congress, we will continue to work in the best interests of everyday Americans. Thank you for your continued leadership in service of the communities we are privileged to represent." So we have Democrats lining up in support. We have Democrats lining up in opposition. And then we have Hakeem Jeffries just letting us know that he talked to Joe Biden and that I guess he delivered some sort of message. Not that we know what that message is. Hakeem Jeffries said nothing. How is a child brain supposed to know what to do? Every authoritative source they might look to has a different idea about what happened and what it means and what should happen than every other source. Is Joe Biden strong and capable or weak and incompetent? It's hard to say. Is he both at the same time? Is he neither? And what does it mean that they're telling us none of this is real? Well, the Washington Post thinks that Hakeem Jeffries was simply issuing a warning to Joe Biden. His lack of overt support means that he's defecting from Joe Biden. They're just not prepared to say it yet because he's too powerful a figure. They need this to go in some sort of escalation or crescendo until we finally see who puts the last knife in. Is it going to be his old pal Barack, the man he served faithfully for 8 years as vice president, while also pointing out that never before have we had a black man who was clean and articulate? And yes, Joe Biden absolutely did say that. The total number of Democrat representatives who have defected from the fake president has now reached 17. They are Lloyd Doggett, Raul Grijalva, Seth Moulton, Mike Quigley, Angie Craig, Adam Smith, Mikey Sherrill, Pat Ryan, Earl Blumenauer, Hillary Schulten, Brad Schneider, Greg Stanton, Ed Case, Jim Himes, Scott Peters, Marie Glusenkamp Perez, and we have a senator now. Senator Pete Welch from Vermont, who no one has ever heard of, including the people of Vermont, I'm certain. The group of communist climate agitators who go by the Sunrise Movement have declared that they are no longer supporting Joe Biden. The Sunrise Movement is primarily funded by the Tides Foundation. It has the support of communists like Bernie Sanders and whatever AOC is. And in addition to the climate stuff, they oppose nuclear energy. They ran a defund the police training course for their activists. And naturally, they were supporting the protesters in Hong Kong, which of course you can expect because they supported the same people right here in the United States of America, only here they're called Black Lives Matter. They are, of course, just an organ of the color revolution agenda. The New York Times tells us that donors to a pro-Biden super PAC are said to be withholding $90 million based on the fake president's performance in the debate and the big boy press conference. They write some major Democrat donors have told the largest pro-Biden super PAC, Future Forward, that pledges worth roughly $90 million are now on hold if President Biden remains atop the ticket, according to two people who have been briefed on the conversations. The frozen contributions include multiple eight-figure commitments, according to the two people, who spoke on the condition of anonymity, given the sensitivity of the situation. The decision to withhold such enormous sums of money is one of the most concrete examples of the fallout from Mr. Biden's poor debate performance at the end of June. Further on in the article, the New York Times writes an aide to one major Future Forward donor, the billionaire Reid Hoffman, an Epstein associate, it's worth noting, who has given $7 million to the super PAC, said that donors were making a mistake in withholding money. A funding freeze is a problematic strategy at this point in the election cycle, said Ray Stewart, who works for Mr. Hoffman's political group. If donors are committed to making a statement by withholding capital from Future Forward or the Biden campaign, she said, then they should make larger donations to progressive nonprofit groups that are agnostic about who's at the top of the ticket. Now, I've long believed that Reid Hoffman is a candidate, a target for drainage. So the idea that he and people like him would have the money they donated to a super PAC frozen if Biden remains on the ticket, knowing that Biden will remain on the ticket, is awfully funny. Don't they have some kind of refund policy? Fox News reports that foreign billionaire Richard Branson, Sir Richard Branson, is no longer supporting Joe Biden.
I just had the chance to read through Richard Branson's note here. He concludes with, but his desire to carry on has created a disastrous distraction from the issues the presidential race should really focus on. You can make that case for his service right now and what needs to be done for the country, including the economy, inflation, crime, and the border, let alone having a real significant substantive debate on the issues with these candidates.
And guess what his net worth is? It's $2.6 billion. Right. That matters.
Oh, no, it's not just George Clooney. Now it's Sir Richard Branson. He, too, by the way, is connected to Jeffrey Epstein. Man, I wonder if our intelligence community has any connection to Jeffrey Epstein. And for that matter, I wonder if any of these figures in media have any connection. Now, I'm not implying that's why all of these people are freaking out and headed for the life rafts. I'm just saying they have something in common. Actress Ashley Judd weighed in. She wrote an op-ed for USA Today with the headline, "I'm calling on Biden to step aside. Beating Trump is too important." Wednesday evening, I was visiting, as we say in the South, with some of my beloved, chosen, and biological family. These folks are my roots, my sense of belonging, and meet many of my most intimate human needs. Is Ashley Judd a robot? It is worth asking if Ashley Judd is a robot. They meet many of her most intimate human needs, K. And some of them remarkably, feverishly love Donald Trump. And I love these Trump folks as if my life depended on it. And at times, it literally has. I do not love the beliefs they believe and cling to. And Wednesday, as I listened to one of my dearest people share some of those beliefs and thoughts, it hurt. I was shaken. My body felt like it was on fire. The words activated in me profound alarm in the aftermath of the recent debate at which President Joe Biden, a deeply decent man, was incapable of countering Trump, while he, unchecked, gushed a fire hose of galling lies. Those people pouring over our border are less evolved than we are. They are naturally less intelligent. They have criminal natures. They are incapable of respecting the rule of law and order. And there are quotes around this passage. I guess she's asserting that these are the things her loved ones were saying. She goes on, "Men must be strong. They cannot be weak." We were talking about the wish for boys and men to experience a full range of human emotions without shame or punishment. And I have to wonder once again if Ashley Judd is actually a robot. Another quote, "It is dog eat dog, and men will get eaten if they show any weakness. China has a massive 2 million man army. They aren't teaching DEI. Good men must be willing to kill at any moment, but just know how to control that impulse." Okay. And Trump folks can act on those beliefs. Another one of my closest people, upon arriving at our local mall, came across black, with a capital B, youth hanging out, laughing, sitting on the hoods of cars. She went inside the mall to notify the security person on duty that black kids were menacingly loafing and up to no good. The security person called the police. I do not necessarily think that all Trump supporters believe, feel, act, and speak like this. I know Donald Trump himself does. That is critical. That is why I have come to realize that my private personal belief is one I should no longer just keep to myself. And so now I ask President Joe Biden to step aside. Hey, Joe Biden, some washed up Hollywood actress is demanding that you stop being fake president. By the way, what is it with elitist liberals reporting on things they watched their so-called loved ones do and blaming it all on Donald Trump? And we're going to skip over a bit of this because, let's be honest, this is a desperate cry for help. She writes, "My deal breaker is not with my loved ones who are thrilled by Donald Trump. I cannot change them. I tried that, failed at that, damaged our relationships by trying that, and I have had enough loss in my life. I neither want nor will I lose any more of my folks, especially over politics. My deal breakers with Donald Trump are many, but after listening Wednesday night in that living room, what is searing me is the cruelty. It cannot be America's future. See, she loves all those people because those are her folks. She knows they're bad, but she can't do anything about it, and she has to maintain her relationships with them even while she insults them in a national newspaper that holds the world record for being thrown out in a hotel trash can the most times. I feel immense bereft sadness at the beliefs Donald Trump holds. That doesn't make sense. And that his supporters endorse. But that sadness is trivial compared to the hurt, devastation, and loss millions will feel if Donald Trump is reelected. He would wield the power of the presidency with unprecedented, incalculable cruelty and unfairness. Especially disturbing is his distortion of Christianity, the force of Christian nationalism advancing him, and the risks for anyone who diverges from that. There is no risk. This is not something I wrote easily, quickly, or for political convenience. And she makes a good point here. It's entirely possible that she didn't write it at all. My belief in what President Biden has done for our country runs deep. My hopes for the next term run high. My investment is personal. I bring my body. I show up. I am a Democrat who relishes traveling up to Wisconsin for early voting, bringing coffee and donuts at 6 a.m. to first-time voters who have slept overnight on the sidewalk outside their polling place, so eager to cast their ballots for an inaugural experience. What? Showing up publicly can cost me, and it absolutely will for far too many if Trump is reelected. When I read the "I Am a Nasty Woman" poem at the Women's March in 2017, I quoted Donald Trump. I was fired for doing so by a company with whom I had an endorsement. Oh gosh, I can't believe that cancel culture destroyed this poor woman's life. Trump said it. He was elected. I quoted him. I lose a life-altering paycheck. That is the double standard of American life for women under Donald Trump, and for all who disagree with him. And for the record, just below that in the USA Today is a picture of Ashley Judd as part of a panel at the South by Southwest Festival from this year. The panel was on media and mental health, entitled "Preventing Suicide Through Safe Reporting and Storytelling." And I suppose that she's only able to speak on stage at conferences in public and get paid to do it because Joe Biden is president right now. We're not in Trump's America anymore. Apparently, she believes she won't be able to speak at conferences once Trump returns, which is patently absurd unless, of course, there's something that she did that might make her in the future unavailable to speak at conferences. And I'm not suggesting she did. I have no reason to believe that Ashley Judd is not a wonderful person, despite the way that she talks about the people who are nearest and dearest to her in life. With Donald Trump in leadership, speech is chilled, dissent is punished. Sharing your truth about your life in America can risk your livelihood. When a man raped me in 1998, I was able to have a safe legal abortion that was accessible right where I live in Tennessee. We already know that many states ban abortions, and 10 states have no exceptions for rape and incest, even for adolescent girls. This is reality for girls and women under Donald Trump, and it must be the principle on which President Biden chooses to voluntarily, gracefully step aside. I thought she was supposed to be telling us why Joe Biden needs to step down, and instead she's just being mean to her loved ones and telling us about her abortion. Here's how she ends. Voters deserve a real choice on the Democrat ticket. Much has been said and printed about the historic progress of this Biden administration, historic job creation, visionary investment in America that future generations will feel. I have a deep appreciation and fond regard for him. Equally much has been said and printed about what Donald Trump has done and will do. I have been watching and listening. As my mom's dear friend, Dr. Maya Angelou, said, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Donald Trump, I see you and I believe you. Thus, because of the very real hurt millions of people would feel when he is president again, the Democrat Party must not delay in thanking President Biden and supporting a talented, robust Democrat to be our party's nominee. We do not have another day for distraction or division amongst ourselves. Some in Washington may want to wait for the next week, the next press conference, the next network interview. Here, where I sit in rural Tennessee, it is clear that Americans have already made up their minds against President Biden, on top of the majority who love to vote for Donald Trump. My folks are not bad people, despite what you may now think of them. Oh, you mean after you just trashed them? It's unbelievable. They are facing bad options. We must give them a different choice from our Democrat Party for President of the United States. So Ashley Judd, paragon of moral virtue, believes that her nearest and dearest are actually terrible and cruel. And Donald Trump is so evil and so threatening that people are going to be hurt by things Donald Trump isn't even going to do. David Frum, who is probably one of the world's most panicked people when it comes to Donald Trump, published in The Atlantic last night, the headline there, Biden's heartbreaking press conference. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but he starts this way. So here's the heartbreak. 3/4 of an hour of detailed, sophisticated answers, mastery of detail, knowledge of world personalities, courtesy to the reporters before him, accurate recall of facts and figures, justified pride in a record of accomplishment, a spark of sharp humor at the very end. And he must be referring to when Biden said, listen to Trump. Very strange. Also, verbal stumbles, thoughts half finished, strangled vocal intonations, flares of unprompted anger, glimpses of the politician's inner monologue, resentment at how underappreciated he is, spoken aloud as it never should be in all its narcissism and vulnerability. So you see, it's a real love-hate thing. He was both great and terrible. He's both decent and awful. He should get out, but he should also stay in. He's not good, but he's better than the alternative, unless we could try other alternatives and then they might be better. The media has not only gaslit the standard issue villagers into oblivion, it seems like David Frum has gaslit himself into oblivion. His article concludes this way. If Biden loses to Trump, the nation Biden believed in does not outlive him. A different America replaces it, one where the presidency can be contested by violence with judicially conferred immunity for an attempted seizure of power. Collective security will be junked, with American military power at risk of being hired by whichever dictators pay bribes to the president and his family. And that's certainly a strange thing to say, while being a proponent of Team America World Police as a world-dominating adventurous military force meant to subdue foreign nations and keep them under control of the global regime. It sounds like he's being mad that someone might take away his toy. Biden's career has been based on the clear-eyed calculus of political risk. But just as the clarity of his presence is fading with the passage of time, so also does the clarity of his perception seem to be degrading. He remembers what he was, and he wants to hold that former being forever. But time has no mercy for human yearning. It takes, and it does not give back. So apparently the world has to say goodbye to Joe Biden, whether Joe wants to go or not. The New York Times attempted to redirect things, apparently after listening to my catharsis episode or something. This is from this morning, how Biden's stumbles collided with a right-wing conspiracy theory. For years, far-right commentators have floated a conspiracy theory that Democrat Party elites were secretly plotting to replace President Biden on the ticket, a switcheroo that could give the party an advantage in November. Suddenly, Mr. Biden being replaced by another Democrat as the party's presidential nominee seems like a distinct possibility. There is no evidence that the chaotic events following June's debate were planned or that Biden's halting performance was intentional. But the crisis over his candidacy has right-wing influencers heralding the moment as a conspiracy theory turned true. It was their final opportunity to toss the old man to one side, as I've been saying for the entire last year and a half, said Vivek Ramaswamy, the former Republican presidential candidate, in a podcast interview after the debate. What they described as a conspiracy theory last year has become a reality today. Far-right social media is rife with outlandish, unproven stories of Democrat crimes and rigged elections. Most of those ideas fizzle over time as they fail to come true. Well, see, here's the thing, Kami. There's no such thing as failing to come true. When it comes to something that's already happened, it's either true or not true. It's been true the entire time. When these realities are accepted into the central narrative, they don't then become true. They were always true. They were never conspiracy theories. That was just what you were calling them, so other people wouldn't realize they were true. It's like these people don't understand their own strategies. Back to the Times. But every now and then, one of those stories collides with reality. The influencers who spread the ideas seize on their luck, using the moment to lend credibility to their work and cement their relationship with followers. It sounds like he's describing the moment when these conspiracies are incorporated into the central narrative and come true. But it's seasoned with that Scott Adams-style cope, where he was wrong for the right reasons, whereas all of us were right for the wrong reasons. Scott Adams seems to actually be waking up a little bit, which is, I guess, a good sign. Discussion about Mr. Biden's candidacy surged on right-wing social networks after the debate, according to Pira Technologies, a company that monitors those channels. The firm found tens of thousands of posts discussing the debate. Many of them mentioned elements of the conspiracy theory. Gosh, thank goodness he has an expert research firm able to tell him that, as if Stuart Thompson couldn't have just looked. They're trying to get other people to believe in their reality too, said Rachel Moran, a senior research scientist at the Center for an Informed Public who has studied conspiracy theories. So these moments of truth, these bridging moments, are where they can try to get other people on board. It's like she's talking about where the truth of reality prime breaks through that layer of the false reality. No one is allowed to notice those. She added that conspiracists rely on those nuggets of truth as, quote, a moment to be able to talk about. Oh, well, if that's true, then the rest of the things I'm talking about must be true, end quote. It's like she's figuring out that once people realize that a foundational element of any sort of theory or belief proves true, as long as the logic is sound and the other premises are true, then the conclusion actually is true. That's kind of how it works. But apparently Rachel Moran does not believe people are allowed to use their brains that way. Truth is not discerned by applying logic to an analysis of facts. It's just whatever the authoritative source says it is. While parts of any conspiracy theory are sometimes proven true, the larger story, usually involving shadowy groups or convoluted schemes, remains entirely unproved. Still, believers tend to focus instead on anything that makes the conspiracy seem more believable. Some far-right Americans, for example, claimed that COVID-19 vaccines were a plot among global elites to wipe out scores of Americans. While a small number of people have fallen ill after receiving some vaccines, and far fewer have died, the dangers never rose to the claims pushed by anti-vaxxers, nor is there evidence of a global plot. Still, any illness or death was quickly leveraged as evidence that the conspiracy theory was true. So he's got some data, he's got some numbers, and that makes other data and other numbers not true. This is the accepted data. This is the only data we're able to use. And there's no evidence of a global plot. And no, the existence of the WHO doesn't count as evidence of a global plot because, you see, it's not a plot. They're just using science to save lives. And sure, global elites are actually running all of this stuff. Their money funds all of the global governing bodies and the universities producing the science and producing the data, and the media companies who disseminate all of the information about the very deadly pandemic, and the politicians who implement all of the strategies and the quote-unquote laws, and the tech companies that censor the people who might disagree with all of this and might be willing to present their own data and their own ideas about what's actually happening. All of these people are also perfectly happy to tell us about how they are coordinating, because the projected image of consensus is what shows the people that all of the authoritative sources agree about the proper ways to proceed. Details about how the conspiracy theory surrounding Mr. Biden vary depends on who is telling it, but the broad strokes are usually the same. Democrat Party elites have been scheming to replace Mr. Biden with another preferred candidate. Sabotaging Mr. Biden with a bad debate performance would give those elites a chance to anoint a replacement, the theory goes. The last-minute change would bypass the protracted primary process that can sometimes embarrass or tarnish candidates, allowing them to undermine Democrat primary voters in the process. They would also short-circuit the Republican counteroffensive. You get the honeymoon phase with a new candidate without the scrutiny that comes with it, Mr. Ramaswamy told Fox News before the debate. The reality seems far less orchestrated. Democrats first appeared crestfallen by Mr. Biden's unsteady debate performance, then scrambled to align behind a single response, with some party leaders backing Mr. Biden and others calling for his replacement. If Mr. Biden were to withdraw from the race, it would probably cause political upheaval, as various factions press for their preferred candidate. Anointing a successor without fuss seems nearly impossible. It has not helped Mr. Biden, whose poll numbers have slipped. Yet the idea that Democrats would plot to replace Mr. Biden has meshed with views perpetuated by former President Donald Trump about the Democrat Party, that its members are not just politically wrong, but remarkably conniving. And that is not the case. He didn't say that. That's me. These people are amazing. That conspiracy theory has also gained traction with help from another baseless belief shared among many Trump supporters that Mr. Biden is merely a puppet of Democrat elites or a shadow political body referred to as the deep state. I think a lot of these people are kind of experiencing a broken clock being at least partially correct twice a day, said Jared Holt, a senior research analyst at the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, a nonprofit research group. It makes sense they would take a victory lap on it if they can. So apparently, realizing when we've been proven right and saying, oh yeah, hey, we were right about that thing that we said a long time ago. That's just another level of the conspiracy theory. We're all just actually repeating baseless claims until the thing we're saying is incorporated into the central narrative when it will become true. You see, the people responding to this manufactured crisis are not actually confused. And their factions are not actually warring. Those are just conspiracy theories. All of it is real and natural and organic as it's playing out, despite the fact that they're also telling us the entire display is an act and we can actually witness the scripting and the performance. Conspiracy theorists, you see, can never be proven right. When new facts emerge in the world, they can only be proven wrong about an even bigger conspiracy theory. At least for a while, until sometime later. The Daily Mail reported last night that Joe Biden might be losing Nancy Pelosi. Their headline, Nancy Pelosi makes shock move against Biden as Democrat insiders reveal she is, quote, very concerned about his chances of beating Trump. Apparently, Nancy has been taking her self-titled role as Speaker Emerita, and she has been canvassing the halls of Congress, figuring out which of her swing state representatives are worried that Biden's presence on the ticket will kill their ability to win down ballot, which in reality means Nancy Pelosi is figuring out who is still on her team, whichever side that represents, if she's going to be out there making sure that elections are stolen on their behalf. And by this morning, CNN was saying it's a done deal. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
You know, my sources were saying leading up to the press conference was, you know, obviously we're hoping he does better than he did at the debate, but we expect the dam to break shortly after. And, you know, I think his performance at the debate, and many, you know, folks texted me and called me and said, you know, I was holding my breath, but he did not do as bad as I thought he would do. Expectations for him, you know, arguably were very low, and the calling the president of Ukraine, Putin, did not set the tone right for the day and for the evening. But many of them said, you know, maybe the dam will hold for a little longer, but it's a matter of when, not if, it'll break. And I think that that's the case right now.
Oh, how about that? They already knew the dam was going to break after the press conference, before the press conference happened. No matter how Joe Biden did, people were already prepared to ask him to get out. And the fact that he did so well and simultaneously so poorly was what let them know that they made the right decision. And that belief was widely shared, except with all of the people who are saying the exact opposite thing. And we are now 2 full weeks into the standard issue villagers being gaslit into oblivion from every possible direction. Can you imagine what it is like to be one of them? Totally obsessed with politics, believes everything that the television says is true, cannot venture outside of normie-dom for any belief whatsoever. Everything they know, everything they are comfortable to say is a product derived from the authoritative source, and the authoritative source itself doesn't know how to help them right now. Now, we can make light of this. I actually feel a little bit bad about what these people are going through. It's been done to us for plenty long enough, and we have learned to recognize it. And when you recognize it, it's far less capable of affecting you. But these poor little commies are having their child brains fried. Everyone on what they believe is their side is now involved in this circular firing squad. And Donald Trump, for really the first time, gets to act as an observer. He's just watching it all take place. Out of the entire collective meltdown that we experience now, every time the nation's eyes are actually on the fake president, Joe Biden, this one might be my favorite. This is Nicole Wallace on MSNBC.
What this show has sought to do for 9 years was just try to close the gap between what people say privately and what is said on live TV. This is from a super donor. This is a pathetic display. We're no better than they are, mouthing talking points that no one believes. A Democratic member of Congress texted me this morning and said it's almost over, just waiting for someone to pull the plug. This is about Joe Biden's candidacy. This is what my colleagues, Jonathan Allen and Carol Lee, reported today. Quote, several of President Joe Biden's closest allies, including 3 people who are directly involved in efforts to reelect him, told NBC News they now see his chances of winning at 0 and the likelihood of him taking down fellow Democratic candidates growing. quote, he needs to drop out. One Biden campaign official said he will never recover from this. My phone is full of Biden allies sending me poll numbers, sending me statements from Democratic members of Congress who have defected and who said they have gone home and received no criticism but praise from their constituents for doing it. This is not a president or a campaign season about whether tax cuts go up or down. It is not a campaign season that is about whose health plan. This is about whether there is a health plan. This is about whether there is a democracy. This is about whether in January we're covering mass arrests of the Clinton, the Obamas, and the Bidens. And I want to know from you, Mark Elias, when the public conversation will match the private one.
Oh, that's what the panic is all about. Let's just play that one more time.
This is about whether in January we're covering mass arrests of the Clinton, the Obamas, and the Bidens.
Well, she is right about that. That's exactly what this is all about. And it's becoming abundantly clear to everyone that the people of this country would love to watch that in January. Mass arrests of the Clintons, the Obamas, and the Bidens. Donald Trump assessed last night's performance by the fake president this morning on Truth Social. They're blaming all of crooked Joe Biden's problems on me, including his really bad performance in the debate. Some say that I was not respectful of him, and he just plain, quote unquote, choked. Actually, I tried being as nice as possible, considering that this is the man who has systematically destroyed our country and the man who has weaponized his Justice Department, doing everything possible to put his political opponent, me, in jail. Why should I be nice to him? He said he, quote unquote, just had a bad night. And I hope for the good of the country that he is right. But his performance since that very eventful debate evening has not exactly been stellar. Yesterday, before his news conference, he made an unpardonable gaffe, introducing President Zelensky as President Putin. Despite all of this, he shouldn't allow complete losers like George Clooney, under the total auspices and control of Barack Hussein Obama, to push him out of office. That must be his decision and his decision alone. Good luck, Joe. An unpardonable gaffe. That's an odd way to put it. All he did was flub a word, right? He called Trump the vice president. He called Zelensky Putin. This is just the sort of thing that happens when you're Joe Biden. It's just a gaffe. What makes it unpardonable? Does he just mean it's too embarrassing? Joe's already on the ropes and this will make it impossible to go on? Or is there something else? The Biden family is guilty of a great many crimes. Was Trump considering pardoning Joe Biden just because his son Hunter might be a confidential human source? I mean, that is just a conspiracy theory. And so, of course, are all of Biden's many crimes whose evidence appears in every page of the report on the Biden laptop by the Marco Polo Research Group. But regardless, the crime thing, that can't be it. Trump was probably just using a euphemism, or maybe he just flubbed a word himself. Here he is this morning on the Clay Travis and Buck Sexton show.
Your takeaway, because the New York Times and a lot of others seem like they thought it could be the end, but it doesn't really seem like the end.
Well, it's not the end for him because when you control the delegates, it's never the end. I mean, there's nothing anybody can do. So as long as he wants to continue doing this, he's going to be able to do that. It's very hard to do anything else. But I thought the worst part of the press conference was the moment during the day when he introduced Zelensky and he introduced him as Vladimir Putin. That was not good. That was unpardonable. You can't do that. You know, there are things you can do and things you can't do. That was a bad one. So he introduced him as Putin, and then I guess somebody started screaming at him, and he corrected as much as you can. You know, that doesn't get corrected very easily. So he went in there with the yips. I think he went into the press conference with the yips because, frankly, if he were Winston Churchill, who is not bad at press conferences, by the way, if he were Winston Churchill, his press conference wasn't going to work out too well because of what happened previous.
So I see. He's used the same euphemism twice. That's what it is. And Nicole Wallace, she was just using a euphemism too when she said that she was worried about mass arrests of the Clintons, Obamas, and Bidens. I'm actually a little disappointed that she stopped there. Why not the Bushes? Oh, wait, didn't Nicole Wallace work for George W. Bush? So really, it's kind of all of them. And whoever was associated with the crimes against humanity and the crimes against America they were committing. I wonder if those people might be worried about being caught up in these so-called mass arrests, because I don't know how you can have a mass arrest of just 3 families. What is it they call that shadowy government bureaucracy that's kind of just carrying out this whole international criminal enterprise? Oh, yeah, the deep state. That old conspiracy theory, that must have been what Nicole Wallace is referencing in that euphemism she used. And if there is one thing I know, this new information that supports my conspiracy theories doesn't do anything to prove them. They are still baseless claims. You know, the way Joe Biden's mental and physical unfitness for office is a conspiracy theory, or at least it was a conspiracy theory. And then the debate happened. And everyone realized, oh, yeah, he is physically and mentally unfit. And upon realizing that new information, everyone has just reacted naturally. None of it could have been planned, because look at how these people are melting down. If you were going to plan something as elaborate as getting rid of a sitting fake president without causing too much public uproar, there's no way everyone tasked with the success of that project would find themselves fighting each other and having daily meltdowns. They couldn't have planned it, because nothing they planned would ever be executed so incompetently that it would end up backfiring and damaging them even more than if they had done nothing at all. If they had planned all this, it would be going better for them. You know, like it has for the last 3.5 years of Joe Biden's fake presidency. Joe Biden has spent more time on the world stage in the last month than he has at any period throughout his fake presidency. And his reputation has been destroyed in coordinated fashion. A massive public ritual humiliation playing out on the world stage. And yes, the whole display is an act, but the cognitive dissonance is real. These people are being gaslit into oblivion, and their brains are about to break. Joe Biden on the world stage has been one of the funniest things I have witnessed in my life. And we have so much more to go. Last night, wonderful performance. It was just the right amount of terrible and just the right amount of good at the same time to make sure these people just continue to lose their minds until they are willing to relent. Pretty soon, all of these reporters in the mainstream media are going to be asking Joe Biden why he lied to them about his 81 million real lawful American votes. They'll tell us that the people closest to Joe, that Jill and Hunter, kept it hidden from the media, who just inadvertently kept it hidden from the American public. The only thing that could have made last night better would have been Donald Trump walking into the auditorium from the back. He begins shouting as he strides down the aisle, asking Biden questions that he knows Biden can't answer, finally having to deal with something that wasn't scripted, something natural, something real. Biden stands at the podium, slack-jawed, his creepy dead eyes staring blankly into the distance. Every moment feels like forever as Trump climbs the steps to the stage, knowing where the steps are on the stage the entire time. Joe Biden unable to say a word to answer Trump's question, just his weird breathy squeak before he says something meaningless like, "Come on, man," or "the idea," or "anyway." Joe finally composes himself, ready to give some answer, some defense, but there's nothing. And Trump says, "It's okay, Joe. I'll take it from here." One of Joe's handlers comes and grabs him by the arm, walking him off stage for the last time, and Trump steps to the podium, ready to answer the reporter's questions. He says, very businesslike, "Okay, where were we?" And then the lights dim and the credits roll. I've said many times over the years that the awakening process is like moving through a series of movie genres. You start with the horror film. You move eventually into an action flick. You have some thrillers, maybe some war dramas thrown in there. And then close to the end, you get to rom-com. I always assumed rom-com was the final stage, but apparently we're going past that to buddy comedy. And I will leave you with President Donald J. Trump.
I just did a physical, by the way, and I came out perfectly. We'll announce those numbers soon, or whatever I have to announce. But I suggest that we go in together and do a cognitive test. We'll do cognitive tests. We'll do it together like a team.
I'll be back on Monday at the same reasonable time on the same Reasonable Podcast Network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic. And Joe Biden will never be president.
In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening to this episode for free, you can support me and support the show and the work I do by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can do so for as low as $50 a year or $5 a month. Comes out to under a quarter per episode, and you'll blast right through the paywall for all of the writing. The merch store is www.cancelcouture.com, and you can find everything else by heading to Linktree. Linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon out on the range. It's